pivoting to the RBA session one, handout number 2, even though it's your first one, which is the whole picture. And this is the whole book in one sheet. It looks like that. All right. So above, there, about 2/3 of the way down, there's something called the accountability boundary. It's a nice reddish line. And this is that cautionary tale of the difference between population and performance measures. And so population is that whole big circle of that are potentially your client. You may or may not have them as clients, but it's that whole geography, that whole demographic, whatever it might be that you want to, that you're working in, that's your sandbox, if you will. Down below the line is your program, your programs, the programs of other people who are similarly working in the sandbox with you, etc. So these strategies below the line could be within one program, multiple strategies. They could be multiple programs within one organization. They could be multiple organizations. There's all sorts of ways that this can work out. It's like Russian nesting dolls, right? So that's that flexibility that RBA brings in, you get to design it any which way you want. But let's just start at the top. So in the population part, and again, we're going to pivot to performance later today, but just to put it in context. Above the line is, what is the end game in the big picture? What's the big picture you are working towards? And so this is, again, wider than probably what you have the capacity to touch, and it's what you're contributing to. So again, that whole accountability piece is really important, recognizing that none of you here are going to actually fix this big thing all by yourself. You're going to just keep whittling away at it, contributing to it, contributing to it, contributing to it. But if someone comes to you and says, the lake is still filthy, you can say, yeah, but the part that I did helped make it less filthy, right? I can't hold the whole lake on my shoulders, right? It's a big lake. It was a great lake at one point, you know, and so. Go ahead, what you got?
No, so it's so frustrating though, because you're like, I feel like some of the status quo uses that as an excuse. Yep. Like, we can't do it, like, we got what we got, this is good, but this is our part. And you're like, but if this is your part, and been your part for the last 50 freaking years.
Do something.
It still sucks, right? Like, it's not making the change enough, or something, or like you just, yeah. So the status quo, I think, uses that a lot. Like, this is the best we can do. And I'm sort of like, I give this, like, what's the next great thing we can do? Yep. Like, what's the next good thing? Like, and I don't know. So I love, it's easy. It's like, I want to be able to be like, this is all I can do. Like, right. But then you can also feel really comfortable, like, this is all I can do.
Right. And I would say that the conversation that follows doesn't really let you sit in that. All right. So thank you for saying that, because we're not going to let you sit there and be wallowing in your own comfort zone. All right. So anybody take we worked a little bit of this. So anybody have a result, like the big picture that they're working towards, that they want to share here? Just so we can put some context.
Clean the lake is a good one.
Okay, clean the lake. You want a clean lake.
Wait, it might not be. Then you had something else.
I was going to say viable agricultural economy, and
wait, that's just go ahead.
The environment that, right, like environmentally and economically viable agricultural sector.
Beautiful. And we want that across Vermont. And some of us are working in partnership across 6 states.
That's likely harder than cleaning the lake.
But as I said earlier,
raise the bar.
And as I said earlier, if it was fixable easily, it would be fixed. So I love that one. So everybody's thriving, including our land and our water. Everybody's thriving. And so these, by nature, are aspirational, right? So the results we're going for are aspirational. They should be a stretch. Right? Then there's a talk about what would we experience if that was happening. What would the experience be? And often in communities and groups, and this is often this part of the conversation often happens in community or with multiple stakeholders. It can just happen in a boardroom or in a leadership committee or at the top people in your program. But in a perfect world, it's bigger than that. Like, again, you're inviting lots of people into the conversation, and you start talking about what would it look like, feel like, smell like, taste like, if we actually were achieving that. And often groups skip over that. I think it's really important to have that conversation because it grounds us in what that vision really is. If we start talking about it from a perspective of all of our senses. And it also helps guide what might be a measure around it. Because if we feel it or see it, then we know what we're looking for. So I wouldn't skip over that question.
Can I ask a question around clarifying a little bit of the difference between the result and the experience? And the reason I say this is for our New England Grazing Network, we went through the ICA process earlier this year and came up with a vision. And it feels like there's a lot of buy-in. Some people it was very consistent. We have a thing that is an 80 to 90% done, not wordsmith thing, but it's real. And it feels to me like it fits in both the result and also in an experience. And I'm just wondering, like,
tell me what it is.
Oh gosh, at break I can grab it off my laptop or print it off so that it.
So where it might be a distinction is, I think if the result is the elevator pitch. Like if you can't remember it or the mission statement, if it's a paragraph, it's not crisp enough to just go, this is the result. So I think there's a headline.
It's a paragraph.
Okay, so there's a headline that is the essence of what you're trying to get at. And then the rest of it might be that experience. So, we want a beautiful, a clean lake means that people can swim in it. That if your dog drinks it, they're not going to die. Right? That all these beautiful things with a vibrant environment and a vibrant farming community. We're not seeing failing farms. We're not seeing auctions of dairy herds. We're not seeing the erosion of our land. That there's a way that we see it, feel it, and experience it that anyone driving through Vermont would experience. Right? So you have the headline measure, and then what does it look like, feel like, taste like? Does that help?
Very much, thank you. And I'm happy to share that.
I would love to see it.
So we can.
Because you're going to be working with it. If that's,
Absolutely.
okay. And then you start thinking about indicators. And Megan, this is where we get into your question about how do you just rest in your laurels when there's still a world crashing around us, right? Hopefully they retire soon. And they're gonna.
We were talking about that.
We were. Get out of the way. If you are not helping, just move on. So you pick some indicators, and there's a whole process for that, and we probably will get to that in some of our last sessions. But these are data points that you can actually track over time, and there's some evaluation processes about how to pick good data points. They're generally, when I usually am working with groups, they are looking outside themselves for that data, that it's not something you can collect because you're usually just collecting data for your clients and your own systems. Because the state's in the room, that may be different for you who work with the state, and that the state might be the hoarder of all that data and the one who analyze it and send it off. So you may be in a place where you have access to both. But this is the place where you start to look at what would tell us that we have a thriving farming community, agricultural system, and sustainable land management. What tells us that we have a clean lake? What are those data points? And it's not 50 data points.
And it's not your population. It's like, so if the lake isn't clean, you can't say, well, I've been doing my little thing.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So it's that big picture, and then the next question, once you've identified the data, you see if you can get it on a regular basis, that there's a history, that you can look at trend lines. The next part of the conversation is, how are we doing? Let's graph this out. And is it going in the direction that we want? So this is the part where he talks about turn the curve, if you've read the book. So you have sort of the data, the historical data. So maybe it's the number of farms in the state of Vermont. Yeah, I'm making stuff up. So the number of farms, I assume, have gone down. Is that what we want? And then you sort of draw a dotted line to where we want to be. And you project out, if we do nothing, what's happening to this actual line? It's going to continue to decline if we do nothing. That's my guess, right? Maybe it'll flatten out, who knows? And you have the conversation about that gap. So the gap between the trajectory of where we're headed and where we want to be, that's the opportunity space, right? That's the burning platform in some cases, right? And that's where we have the conversation about, are we happy with the status quo? If we're happy with the status quo, okay, let everybody go home and keep doing what you're doing. Are we unhappy with the status quo? Well, who wants to do something different? And then you have the conversation about what might we do that's different. And this is the place where, again, bringing lots of people to the table is important, because again, we are maxed out. So if we say we're going to do something new or innovative, what are we giving up? Right? This has become sort of a board question often, or a legislative question. If we don't have the capacity to already do what we've already said we're going to do, and we're going to take something new on, what do we let go of? Or who do we ask that can do it? Who has the capacity to step into this? Sometimes the solutions don't require any assets. They just require a change in how we do business. Right? So one of Mark's requests, whenever you're having a conversation about what works, is to say, what are the low cost and no cost ideas? And that's a very intentional thing that it gets asked. And I want you to put a star next to those two things. Low cost, no cost, and wild ideas. And these are important because if you're working in your own organization which is feeling strapped, or you're working in community where everyone's feeling strapped, the first thing that's going to happen is someone's going to say, I don't even know why we're here. It's not like anyone's going to give us any more money, and we can't even do what we said we're going to do. So why are we talking about what else we could do, right? And there's nothing to stop a conversation faster than that person. They should also retire. Get out of the way. So by just putting in low cost and just saying, okay, we're going to start with the low cost, no cost ideas. So you shut them down right away. Like we can innovate without any extra resources. Let's get busy. Let's get hopping and have that conversation. And I've seen it happen like miraculously almost every time. It's simply a question of changing the form, changing the timing, changing how multi-agencies or organizations work together, and opening the door to saying, oh, we could do a better handoff, right? There's all sorts of no-cost ideas that actually just involve maybe relinquishing a little control and making a little tweak to the system.
Or being honest about the time you spend doing something, which is our biggest shift of time that we do. But yeah.
So this is usually a really robust and juicy and fun time, and it's brainstorming, right? So there's no evaluation of those ideas when we're brainstorming. You know, you can't say that, maybe you can't say, we have a magic wand and it clings to the lake. Like that's not, it has to be grounded in reality, but not so much reality that it's limiting and not thinking big about what the next big innovation is. And then the next part of it is, who's not at the table that has something to say about this, or who might have a role to play, and how do we get them involved? And who's going to ask them? And then finally, from that brainstormed list, as a program, as an organization, as a community, you pick which ones you're going to work on. And it's not all of them. This is not a place to come up with a new idea. This is the place to say, out of all those ideas, what could we do right now? What's the low-hanging fruit? What's going to be the most impactful? What can we sustain? And so one of the criteria that I have started to really embrace is, could we do it now with minimal resource infusion? Is it sustainable over the long haul? And do we think it has the promise of making a big impact? Right? So if it's not going to make an impact, don't do it. If you can't sustain it, don't do it. Right? But so you have to sort of put some, and those don't have to be your guidelines for what you would take on, but for me, those seem to be pretty practical and grounded. All right, so any questions on the top of the line, above the line?
I just have a comment on that. The sustainability issue is an interesting one, because I often feel like some things I have to do, I don't have to do them for very long. I just have to do them.
Okay.
Like, so this, and then because often I feel like in this area of ag, like, it's going to be something different I have to push on next time. Like, I got to push here, and I got to push there, and I got to push there.
So you're sort of doing it in tiers, or in phase one, phase two.
And so how do you take into, like, what's the next push we have to do? Because they don't always have to be long-term sustainable.
So yours may be more about a system thinking, and what's the system lever that I can do now to tweak the next system lever? Like, what has to happen first? So there may be for you more a question of sort of the leverage points to shift the system, whatever that is. And that would be a great framework to sort of assess what the next step would be. Anybody else have something to say?